Hey everybody, welcome back to Gideon Stuff. Today, we're talking about the Civivi Plethiros and why weird knives are so important to this hobby. Now, before we start talking about this knife in detail, I want to talk about how I got it, because it's kind of a fun story in my opinion. So, a few months back, you guys probably remember the first time I showed this on a video. It was in the first impressions of the CRKT Facet. So the Facet was a knife that I picked up a couple days before this one, about a week before this one. I was at a Cabela's. I was picking up some gear for some field work. I was about to go and spend a couple of days out in the field, and so I was picking up some gear. I saw the Facet on sale, and I picked it up. So I went out into the field. We started doing field work, and the area that we're working in, it's very deserty. It's very dry, and it has these huge, steep mountains. There's no trees, no shade, and we're working in weather around the 100-degree mark. So pretty rough terrain. And funny story, my first ever time out at this in this research area with my the guy who I'm a research assistant to. My very first time out there, I went down with heat exhaustion. We were working. We put in about 10 hours that day, and I overheated. Started vomiting and everything. And luckily, I recovered fairly quickly. Just got it out of my system, and we were okay. Well, on this particular time, we're out doing research. We ended up doing 12 hours. It turned into a little bit of a longer day than we anticipated. You try and get out there as early as you can, work while it's cool, and then get out of there. We put in 12 hours. And at the end of the day, my partner, he went down with heat exhaustion. And his condition was a little bit worse than when I went down, a few weeks earlier. And, the vomiting, the, weak legs, the whole 9 yards. So we were able to get him out of the mountains and to the vehicle. And I took him to this cabin we were staying at, got some electrolytes in him, got him all laid down. One thing that was interesting, it's even though it was nighttime by the time we got to the cabin, so it was about 80 degrees outside, and he was shivering. He was cold, which is not really a great thing, right? But get him to the cabin, get him, some medical attention, and he kind of slept it off that night. The next morning, we decided that he was still kind of feeling a little bit out of it, and we decided that it was probably not a good idea to go back into the field. We were supposed to be out there for another day longer, but we decided that it was probably not worth it. And so we went back to town. When we got back to town, we discovered that there was a gun show going on. And so we decided that we were going to go and stop by just for the heck of it. So we did. Went to the gun show, walked around a little bit, saw some cool things. As we were leaving, I saw a man at a table selling knives. Now, the Civivi Plethiros is a knife that I've wanted for a long time. I remember when I first got into the hobby, this knife was either released very soon after I kind of started, in on the whole YouTube enthusiast thing, or it was released just a little bit before. But I remember seeing it pretty early on and thinking, wow, that is a really weird-looking knife, and I really, really like that. And so I always wanted one, but at the time, this was like a $75 knife, and, as a college kid who's just kind of getting into this hobby, that was a little bit more money than I wanted to spend. I was just out of high school and everything, didn't have a whole lot of funds, and so I just didn't buy it. Time went on, and this knife was discontinued, and I decided I really need to get one. So I put it in my cart, and I take it out, I put it in and take it out, get distracted by other things. I started doing the channel, started reviewing things, so there's other knives that I wanted to get in. And so this just kind of kept getting pushed back and back and back. And I wanted to get the tan G10 version so that I could dye it, which, as you can see, we did. But, it just never worked out. I I got other things, or I just got distracted and forgot about it. And so this summer, I decided that I was going to get one and modify it. Well, fast forward to this guy at this table at the gun show. He's selling knives. Had a lot of cool stuff there. And one of the knives he had was a tan-scaled Plethiros. And I decided, you know what? This is my chance. And he was selling it for a pretty good price. He was selling it for similar prices that it was going for on sale on Blade HQ and stuff. I think I picked this up for like, I think it was $60. So I bought that from him. And I was very, very pleased with it. After the gun show, my buddy, he went home to rest and, just kind of take care of himself. And we were supposed to be out in the field for several days. And then right after field work, I was going to be going to field camp. But now I had a couple of days of just free time. And at this point, I was just living out of my tent and stuff, out of my truck. And I decided that, before field camp starts, I'm going to run home and visit my folks. I haven't seen them in a while, say hi to everybody, and then I'll come back and do field camp. So after the gun show, I loaded up into my truck and I drove 6 hours home to visit everybody. And, crazy, maybe not the smartest thing, but I'm glad I did it. And the whole way I was driving there, I was fidgeting with this knife. So, yeah, there's a little bit of a story behind how I got this knife. Now, I want to talk about the knife itself. This is an Elijah Isham design. And just like everything he did, it's weird and wacky and wonderful, and it stands out. As a lot of you know, Elijah Isham passed away, sadly, a while back. And when I heard the news, I was greatly saddened because I absolutely loved his design language. More than any other designer, I would follow him to see what would he come up with next, because it was always just so crazy and wacky and different. And I could spot an Isham design from a mile away, right? They stand out. There's not anything quite like them. And, I've got a couple of other Isham designs, including, the McKenna right here, which is a little more of an EDC-able knife. But, yeah, he's got a very, very interesting perspective on design. And so a lot of his designs that I wanted to get are being discontinued and stuff. And obviously it's very sad that we're not going to be getting any more of these designs from him, because they're very special. They're unique knives that are completely unlike anything else. So this knife here has a lot of really interesting features that are very Isham-y. One thing is this flipper tab here. He likes to do these flipper tabs just stick straight up, and they work good. You get lots of leverage, and then they disappear when the knife is open, which is pretty cool in my opinion. Another thing that's pretty Isham-y is this blade hole, which is kind of sort of not functional. I can, sometimes, oh, come on. Yeah, I can sometimes thumb flick it out. It's a little bit difficult because you run into this corner here, but you kind of got to go like this. Yeah. And I can sometimes reverse flick it. Oh, come on. It's a little bit difficult to get to, and it's a little bit easier to do when I'm not under a camera. I'm kind of more behind the camera today, but yeah, that's kind of a trademark of his. Another thing that's very Isham-y is kind of this weird handle shape. It's kind of a hump. And in my opinion, his handles and blades never really complement each other all that well. And that's not that's not a dig. It's part of his style, and it's something that I think is very interesting. This blade is honestly kind of a normal looking blade. It's got some Isham flair, but it's pretty much a drop point / leaf clip point. But this handle is so angular and humpy and weird. You could put any blade on this handle, and I think you could attach any handle to this blade, and it'd just look weird. And I think that's very cool. Another thing I like is how this grind line swoops down and joins up with that right there. That's very, very cool. As I said, I dyed this. I love these Civivi knives that had the G10 overlay on top of, or the carbon fiber overlay on top of the tan G10. I also did my, do I have it lying around here? Yeah, I do. This was one I did a long time ago with my Statira. I did kind of a navy blue, which I think looks excellent. But yeah, I did that here. I love it. You know, obviously the carbon fiber doesn't take the dye, but the rest of the scales do. So yeah, I did purple in this case. The same day I did this one, I also did another discontinued Civivi. This is the Courser, which is one that I really, really like. And I kind of did a Hulk theme on this guy with the purple scales and the green back spacer. Very, very cool knife. This one's a very, very cool knife. I need to make a video on this one. I don't like making videos on discontinued knives that, you know, it seems a little bit, I don't know, wasteful, but that's not the word I'm looking for. It just seems not useful, I guess. I am making a video on this knife, though, because it's very unique, very interesting, and I think there's a lot to say about the knife community as a whole through this knife. But speaking of these scales, one thing I found interesting about this knife is that the inside of these scales are actually carbon fiber. It's like we've got like carbon fiber liners. I'll show you some pictures of that taken apart. But that's kind of interesting. It's weird, but I like it, right? It's weird to have more carbon fiber on the inside of the knife than on the outside. And again, kind of an Aishmi thing that I like. Other than those weird design details, there's a lot of things here that are really cool. You know, obviously Civivi T8 hardware everywhere, but I find it interesting that such a weird knife only has a pivot and a single body screw. Very minimal hardware, and that's crazy. Now, how EDC-able is this knife? Honestly, you could carry this, right? The ergonomics are not terrible. They're not my favorite thing. You know, you can choke up here, and that feels pretty good. This blade is a full flat grind. It's D2 steel, nice and thin behind the edge like Civivi normally does. Pretty good blade shape for EDC, so, I mean, you could use this, but I do not think this is the most EDC optimized design ever, and it doesn't have to be, right? And that's going to bring me on to kind of what I want to talk about with this knife. It seems that everything is the same in the EDC community nowadays. I know I've said this so many times. You guys are probably sick of hearing it, but it's really weird to me to look at these new knives being released and be like, oh, so that's exactly the same as this thing. You know, these knives all look the same. As a society, we have figured out how knives work, right? We figured out what makes a good knife. Knives have been with humanity for thousands of years. Many, many years. Knives were among our very first tools. You know, you probably had hammers / clubs and knives. You know, cutting things is something that's very useful. I mean, Homo habilis probably used knives, right? Knives probably were not even invented by our species. They're vitally important. They've been with us forever. There has never been a time in history when knives have not been common tools. Every culture has designed their own knives for ceremony, ritual, or battle, or just the everyday utility that their culture needed a knife for, whether it was the specific types of crops they grew or animals they hunted. Knives have been around. And today, when we live in a world where there's so much interconnectivity between cultures, where information and ideas can be spread instantaneously, we have kind of mixed and mashed the different knives of all cultures around the world into knives that are just kind of optimized for people's use today, right? An example of this is, where did I put it? You know, something like the CJRB Pyrite. And now I love this knife. This thing here, or, I mean, even better yet, too, the drop point version, this is a very knifey looking knife, right? It's very plain. But it's because we know this works. A drop point blade is incredibly versatile. I think a drop point blade is the most versatile of all blade shapes. You can put it into any type of roll. This handle shape Also reminiscent of a lot of knives, and that's because all human hands are pretty similar, right? We grab things in similar ways. Our motor skills all work very, very similarly. So this type of design works, right? This is a 100% functional and utility-driven knife. And that's great, right? We all need knives like this. I love knives like this. I absolutely love using my knives. And I appreciate a well-made design that's thought out and useful. However, we have a lot of them on the market now. And for people who are users only, they will only buy a few knives and they will use them. They'll find what they like and they will use that knife and that knife only, right? That's just the way it is. However, us snobby enthusiasts, we like things to be exciting. We are in this because it's fun. You know, we buy knives because it's fun for us, because we enjoy this hobby, because we just like knives. And, you know, maybe that's a little bit weird, but it's true, right? And companies like Civivi nowadays, they're not really building knives for users anymore. This is going to be kind of hard to hear, but, you know, the Elementum is a great knife for someone who's just looking for an EDC knife. And so they could buy this and they're done, right? Civivi's main market is us enthusiasts, us collectors, us just weird oddballs. And I mean, I'm not just picking on Civivi, I'm picking on the industry as a whole. We've seen it all before, right? We've seen it all before. As enthusiasts, we have knives in our collection that we like using. Like, we have our user knives, we have our knives that we're like, okay, yeah, this is my dedicated tool. I love this, but I want to build my collection. I want to collect things that bring me happiness. And there's a couple of ways to do this. You could bring happiness by having a well-made knife, right? You can bring happiness through use. I get a lot of happiness through the utility of my knives. But another way to bring happiness is to show people something they haven't seen before, a spectacle. And Elijah Isham was a master of spectacle. This knife reminds me of a simpler time maybe not a simpler time, but it reminds me of a bygone era of the knife community, of the knife world, where when I was getting into this and I'm looking around and I'm seeing knives that are just weird and exciting from designers who have these ideas that they want to share with the world. And I love that. I absolutely love that. Now, I will say, I think Civivi is getting more comfortable now with getting back into letting some weirder designs come out. For a long time, Civivi was so androgynous. All their designs were so bleh. They didn't have spirit. They didn't have soul. But now, some of the things I'm seeing from Civivi this year especially, I'm like, okay, that's different. That's new. They're partnering with, more designers. I'm like, cool. That's awesome. I like to see that. Give us something unique. Give us something special. Something the world hasn't seen before. Even if it's not 100% EDC optimized like this knife is. I love this type of stuff, and I think a lot of people do, right? People like to be entertained. People like to be amazed. People like to see things differently. Something I love about this knife is this is something that I would never think up, right? If I were to design a knife, I would never design something like this. I would never think about this. This is something that I would never think about. If this knife never existed, I would never miss it because I wouldn't even have the capacity to think it up. But the fact that someone did think it up and they brought it to the market and I can buy it and have it now, that's wonderful to me. I absolutely love that. And designs like this just feel so much more passionate. They feel so much more... They feel created. They feel designed rather than made. The Civivi Conspirator, this is a good knife, right? This is a good knife. I enjoy this knife. It's a good EDC knife, comfortable in hand, good blade shape. But it's just another soulless button lock made because button locks are a craze. This knife is made because Elijah Isham is a mad lad. And I love that. I want to see more knives like this. I want to see weirdness. And I think we need weirdness. We need weirdness in this hobby because otherwise we end up with stale, boring meh. And none of us want stale, boring meh. We want fun, entertaining knives. And that's all I'm going to say about that, guys. This is an excellent knife. I'm really happy to have this in my collection. I love Elijah Isham's designs. This is so weird. There's a couple that I need to add to my collection yet that I'm still hunting down, but I didn't want to make a full review on this knife because, number one, it's discontinued. Speaking of which, these are on sale a lot of places, so if you haven't got one and you would like to, now's a great time to do it. But yeah, this knife is discontinued, and again, it's not the most EDC optimized thing, so if I did a review on this, honestly, the review would come out a little bit negative because, yeah, the ergonomics are not that great and things, and I'll be honest with you, the action is not amazing. It's okay, but it's not amazing. So the review would sound a lot more negative than I would want it to. It would kind of make it feel like I was crapping on this knife when anything but. I enjoy this knife a lot. But not necessarily as a knife. I enjoy it as a work of art. So, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, leave it a like, comment below, and subscribe. I've been Gideon, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.